Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I'll carry the session in English if nobody minds, so please prepare what you need to translate or anything. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Lord Marland, for the great, as always, speech. Thank you, Ms. Anabel Gonzalez, for the informative and detailed talk as well. As you all know, first of all, as well, the ministers actually had to leave for an urgent meeting starting at 11 a.m. Otherwise, he was actually going to be part of this panel, but he will be returning, inshallah, for lunchtime and staying with us. The purpose of this session, a panel, is to go beyond what we spoke about briefly in our keynote opening speeches. Basically, what was mentioned to summarize. One thing is all the Kuwait government efforts to diversify the economy, which the minister talked about, not only with the oil prices going down, but in general, so we can have a more sustainable economy going forward. And typically, globally, as mentioned by the World Bank representative and Lord Marland and everyone, is typically run and driven by the small and medium enterprises in countries. And with that, it was established, the Kuwait National Fund for SME Development, with the huge mandate of providing all type of support from developing the skills, human capital, as well as the SMEs, financial and non-financial services. So with that, I'm honored here to sit with the two distinguished speakers to get their opinion and experiences on certain points. I'll start with you, Lord Marland, if you don't mind. You've served, as, like you said, as the Minister of Business, and I think you're also responsible of innovation there. What policies in general or that you put in place, what tools did the government at the time that you were minister have put in place to promote the conducive SME ecosystems?
Well, of course, when I was in government, we had no money because we were virtually, we had gone through a very deep recession. And on that point, by the way, we're incredibly grateful to our friends from Kuwait to supporting our economy, coming over and shopping and buying a lot of big things as well as small things. You bought huge buildings around London. You've invested in a number of our very big companies. And of course, you've spent a lot of time in Harrods. And of course, where I live in Knightsbridge, you might as well be in Kuwait for most of the year. So I am very grateful, and I feel very much Kuwaiti as a result of it. But on a serious point, we had no money, as was well documented. So we had to find various knobs that we could turn to pump prime it. One of them was we set up a special enterprise investment scheme, which was a tax break, which would allow people investing in new SMEs 60% or 50%, depending on what taxation you were paying, 50% tax relief, let's call it 50%, on any investment you made into a startup, small enterprise with an annual tax reduction of £75,000, which meant that you could invest up to £150,000 with a maximum of £50,000 per country. The second thing we did was we imposed very strict disciplines in terms of regulations. We had a one-in, two-out policy, which was initially, which was our initial step, so that if you wanted to put a new law in, you had to take two new laws out. The third thing we did was we went through every single regulation in each department, and at that time I was Minister for Energy, and we had 286 regulations, and we went through every single one of them. We removed 80 within 3 months, and then there was a real drive to remove another 80, and of course the more you try to do, the harder it becomes, because the civil service get to a point where if you remove everything, there's no job for them. So it's that sort of battle you have with your civil service to change things. And then we set up a mentoring group of people throughout the country, all of which had been in business, started SMEs, senior business figures, who would mentor new startups and helping them start their organization. And the final thing, it's not really the final thing, but one of the final things we did was we went back to starting technical colleges. Technical colleges had really withered on the vine, and a lot of you have been to the United Kingdom, and you will know that in the good old days when I was in shorts, we used to have a very strong technical college system. We used to have a university system where it wasn't a stigma not to go to university. It was perfectly acceptable to go straight into enterprise or go straight into work. And for those that couldn't go to university, they would go to technical colleges where they could learn hairdressing, they could learn manufacturing of technical manufacturing. They could learn a whole range of skills. And so we have started technical colleges, and I would probably stand to be corrected, so please don't write this down, but I think we've started something in the region of 40 throughout the country, and it's an ambitious rollout plan. So those were some of the things we did when I was in government. Sorry to be so long-winded.
Oh, no, thank you very much. This is very helpful, especially the technical colleges one, so we'll have another chat about it, lengthy one. Anabel, I'll go to you along the same lines that Lord Marland started, but on the World Bank side. I know you help a lot of countries and institutions around the world on that. And before I get specifically to the area of trade and competitiveness, generally speaking, what help typically does the World Bank give or notices that countries need when you're helping them on that area, especially on growth of SMEs and creation of jobs?
Let me probably start by saying that the World Bank has two very important goals. One is to eradicate poverty, and the other one is to boost shared prosperity. And in order for us to help our client countries reach these goals, SME development is fundamental. SME development is crucial because 7 out of 10 jobs in the developing world are generated by small and medium-sized enterprises. So this is quite an important number. Nevertheless, having said this, many of these jobs are not as well paid as those in larger firms, and SMEs also confront important challenges to grow. So if you go to many countries, actually, the question that we receive the most is, one, how can we foster an environment where more SMEs can grow and can develop? And second, I think a related question that is also very relevant is how can SMEs be more productive? So I was in Doha yesterday talking about this same topic. Great interest on SME development there as well. And we were saying that when discussing SMEs, there are at least 4, probably the key word is access. Access to 4 different things. First one is access to a good business environment. Because you can have every specific intervention that you may want, and those are very important, and I will get to those. But the starting point is to have a good business environment. And I was listening to some of the things that were being mentioned before, and I think this is a case in point. A good and open trade regime, good competition policy in place, a favorable business climate. Just yesterday, for instance, in Doha, they were discussing about opening up the postal service as a way of bringing more competition into that market to support e-commerce, which is, of course, a great venue for the development of SME. So, flexible labor markets, a good innovation system. So in general, access to a good ecosystem is important. Second point that is also very relevant is access to credit. And this is not only in terms of a banking system providing access to credit, but also, for instance, promoting venture capital, crowdsourcing platforms, crowdfunding platforms, and others. Third important point is access to markets. access to markets, access to networks, access to opportunities. And here, you know, it's a question of supporting direct exports of SMEs, but it's also a question of supporting their linkages to, you know, larger firms, which can be domestic firms or can be multinational firms. Connecting to regional value chains and global value chains is an excellent opportunity for SMEs to internationalize. And here it's a question of connecting, but it's also a question of looking at it from the perspective of reducing trade costs. Because trade costs fall disproportionately on SMEs. Larger companies, you know, can have the luxury of paying for, you know, staff that is dedicated to dealing with the cost of trade. But for SMEs, that is much more constraining. And the final point is to have access to supportive programs that will allow SMEs to flourish and to grow. So for instance, strengthening managerial capabilities seems to be something that is very relevant in many of the countries. Strengthening the skills of the workforce, making sure that the skills that they have are relevant to the marketplace. All of these are very important elements as well in fostering SME growth and development.
Thank you very much. I wanted to focus a little bit more about the environment and competitiveness, but I'll do it after I just, because you mentioned a word that I would like to go back to Lord Marland for. We've been talking about linkages. We've been talking about, especially in the Gulf, being small countries. Your markets have to be beyond your own borders, and therefore you have to be competitive from the beginning, and you need to link with the outside. So you can look at GCC, for example, as one market, but then globally on others. So my question to you, Lord Marland, was when you were in government as well as now as the Kuwait British Business Council, the co-chair, what are you looking at or how are you doing it? Because linking businesses, especially small ones across borders, is not easy.
No, it's an enormous challenge. We had, the biggest challenge we had in government was 60% of our SMEs did not export. And of those 60% that did, of those 40% that did export, only 60% of them only exported when someone came to their office and said, I would like to buy from you. And that is a frightening statistic in a nation like the United Kingdom, which is a trading nation, which is a small island, which has always had to trade and get out and do it. And it was a really tough task trying to give companies the confidence to go beyond the United Kingdom to trade. A lot of them had traded in Europe because it was easy to get to, and a lot of them obviously had been reliant on their own market because we had been through very strong and fertile economic times. They hadn't really had to go out and push that extra mile for trade, and I think it's something that we lost in the UK over a 10-15 year period. I remember when I started my first business in 1982, the first country I visited within a week of starting was the United States. The second country was Abu Dhabi, and in 1982 Abu Dhabi was a totally different place to what it is now. But we thought nothing of getting on a plane, going to another country and trying to generate business. However, I think we've lost that in the United Kingdom. And it's all about this, you can take the horse to water, and we took a lot of trade missions. We brought a lot of trade missions here to Kuwait and other countries. Slowly, it's getting people back into that trading mentality and that requirement. But it's not a quick fix thing, and I can't honestly say you must do this and it will happen. It doesn't. It's got to be in the mindset of the company. I would just go back to an earlier point, or part of your point, Mohammed, and that is that Kuwait must look at its competition. It's all very well setting up an SME fund, wanting to pump prime SMEs, but if you have employment practices that stifle entrepreneurship, enterprise, hard and energetic work, you will not keep up with your competition. If you have laws that make it difficult to start businesses in Kuwait, which you have had in the past, you will find it difficult to start this SME program. And in the end, it will be your competition that wins. The other Gulf states, who are all trying to do exactly the same thing, by the way, will be much more, will beat you to the finishing line.
Thank you. Just on that, I'll comment very quickly, probably at the very end, as far as the effect of regulations or access regulations on competitiveness and all of that, and the efforts the Kuwait National Fund is doing, but I'll keep that to the end. So back to you, Anabel, if you allow me, please. We know you have to be competitive. We know you need to be linking with outside, beyond your borders. So with that needs the requirement to be competitive from the beginning. The question is, though, if you demand high competitiveness, you may also be choking small businesses as they're growing. If a government entity requires high level of competitiveness and so forth, how did you deal with that in other countries? What trends, in other words, what trends are you seeing in other countries?
I think it's very important. One very important role of government is providing businesses with a competitiveness environment. There is a lot that a government can do to foster competitiveness. We were talking about the investment climate, for example. This is quite relevant. For instance, for many SMEs, having an environment that is conducive to larger foreign direct investment coming in the country is quite relevant. But if you have, for instance, restrictive laws in terms of foreign direct investment, then that may also hamper the development of SMEs. For instance, again, having an open environment in terms of competition policy, again, a very important element for SME participation. And I'm mentioning this too because it's no coincidence that we are working very closely with Kuwait in trying to address some bottlenecks in this area. So I think for SMEs, the role of the government in promoting this competitive environment is crucial. And in one particular area, I find that it is very relevant, and that is reducing the cost of trade, as I was mentioning before. Because an SME can be very competitive up to a certain point. If then it becomes very expensive for them to get to the goods out of their borders, then it limits the possibilities of development of those SMEs. So every measure that can be introduced to facilitate trade, to facilitate cross-border management, to improve the logistics, all related enabling services is very, very important. And I also want to come back to this point of e-commerce and digital trade, because I do believe that for many countries, this is a great opportunity. This is something that, was not there maybe 10 or 15 years ago, but that is, we're seeing a tremendous growth in many places, and I think that countries in this region are well poised to grow in that particular area as well. But then again, you need to look at it from an integrated perspective. What are how do your postal services fare compared to others? Do you have a legislation on e-payments? Do you have access to networks? So different elements that need to be looked at to make sure that those opportunities can be fully leveraged.
Great, thank you. Please.
Well, I was going to add to your comment about e-commerce. This is the incredible change that's happening in the world. And it'll be very interesting to see how, particularly in retailing, how the trend moves. In America now, over 50% of purchases are via e-commerce. In the UK, it's now 25%, so it's growing rapidly. But I guess in Kuwait, it must be pretty low, isn't it?
It's growing also very fast. There's
probably
more and
under
more.
5%, would you think?
I don't have the statistics for it.
Yeah, I guess it's pretty low. And what's very interesting is you go to the avenues here, it's a vibrant shopping place. You go to a high street in the United Kingdom or a mall in the States, these are places that are collapsing because no one's going to them to buy. They're doing it all online. So really, the heart of this is distribution. And for those people who are in Kuwait who are thinking of using the e-commerce route, which they should be, as a way of exporting, they've got to make sure that this is underpinned by very strong distribution.
I think we'll probably in Kuwait need or feel that we should try something on before we buy it. So maybe this is one of the reasons on High Street is a bit different for us.
Did you
Kuwait.
try your suit on before you bought it?
I did.
That's good.
So just to summarize, I think a lot of the points that were repeated here over and over. One is the business environment, ecosystem, and so forth, which ranges from making it easy to get a license to operate all the way to access to various things. Being competitive, and being competitive doesn't only mean how you do business, but it's also a mindset, which is typically the case with any small business. It's the mindset. The person who had the idea, created the business, he or she or with their partners are critical to the success of the small business, the startup, because they're the founders. So it is a mindset, not only the competitiveness side, but also the management and the growth of the whole business. And that, in turn, is affected by regulations. In Kuwait, for the past, I can't remember how many months, we've been doing scanning of all regulations, whether council-administered decrees, ministerial decrees, and so forth, that are related to businesses directly or indirectly, and revising all of them to see which ones are relevant, which ones can be revised or reduced, which ones can be eliminated. And one of them was issued maybe a couple of months ago, 2-3 months ago, reducing the minimum capital requirement for creating a business. And it was reduced sharply, very much. So that was one of them, but the rest of the regulations are all being reviewed. And the last important point, I think, was the cost of trade and how e-commerce could actually facilitate that or help reduce that cost. And for us in the Kuwait National Fund, this links to how or what the support we provide to SMEs as far as the marketing, whether in Kuwait or abroad across borders. It's actually one of the points in our mandate to help the business with marketing regionally and globally. So with that, I wanted to ask you one more question, but I think I'll keep that to our advisory board meeting this afternoon, related to direct advice to the National Fund going forward, but we'll keep that in the afternoon. But do you have any last words you'd like to give?
I think the other thing I forgot to say was that we reduced corporation tax very significantly from 30% to 20% over a period of time. Of course, corporation tax is very low here, isn't it? Is there a corporation tax here?
There is corporate tax, and I think it's 15%, and now being looked at because it wasn't implemented on everyone equally. Yeah. I think it was foreign companies, but not Kuwaiti companies, and now.
So we reduced corporation tax, and it's the lowest in G20 by quite a long way. And the other thing we did, we put in we increased the threshold from where corporations paid tax. So that allowed a lot of SMEs to start without paying tax until they got to a point where they pay tax. So it's just sort of going back to my initial comments. It's about creating an environment where people can develop and feel there is an opportunity. The final thing that needs looking at, and that we had a problem with actually in the UK, you've obviously got to have a very quick registration system. You've obviously got to have lawyers who are carrying out the incorporation very quickly, which in a lot of countries is a real block to entry. Lawyers, as we all know, apologies to those in the room who are lawyers, make their money out of working for long times. You have to condense that time, and therefore you have to bring competition amongst lawyers into the system so that they all recognise that they're not going to get the business unless they get on with it quickly. And the one problem we had in the UK was with our banks. After the banking crisis, the banks went into reverse, And so it was very difficult to open bank accounts, simple bank accounts. So a very quick ability to open bank accounts and to be able to register with a bank is very fundamental to a new company to start.
Well, thank you for that, and it brought to my mind another question, which is beyond topics of this session, but I'll talk about it before going to Anabel for closing. How, in the British government, going back a couple of decades, how did you encourage the financial sector, banks and other financial institutions, to actually get into financing and giving credit access to SMEs? Because typically high risk and they're not interested.
Yes, I mean, the point I was making was not actually about the financing, because most, as you say, most SMEs are financed out of angel financing. So you've got to create an investor environment where there are tax breaks, where there's, people can analyze the angel investment, the pump priming investment activity, which is very strong in the UK. So the banks are not really going to play in that role, and didn't really. They had their venture capital funds, but they were much bigger type of startup businesses. So for the small businesses, you've got to have either, as you've got here, a government-sponsored fund, which is brilliant, or you've got to be able to encourage angel investors, which we have. The point I was making about banks, it's the physical regulation now of just setting up a bank account. And the time it takes, because it's not actually about having an overdraft facility, it's about the facility of writing out checks and receiving cash. And that is a problem we've had to grapple with in the UK.
Thank you. Anabel?
I should probably say that there is no, silver bullet to create, grow more productive SMEs. It's a combination of measures at the firm level, at the sectoral level, and at the country level. And I believe that at the stage at which Kuwait is, it has a great opportunity, in going forward, because 2.3% of jobs are created, 23% of jobs, are created by SMEs. In other regions, in other countries, it's close to 70%. So there is a great opportunity to grow there. There's also a great opportunity for SMEs to contribute more significantly to GDP. But I think there's going to need to be a strong push to foster that entrepreneurship culture, to change and probably to make some sweeping changes to the business environment to make sure that it's a conducive business environment. And then, of course, we have this great instrument, which is the fund, to provide support to SMEs to make sure that that they can register the business quickly, that they can have access to skills workforce that is required, that they can be supported in terms of development of the managerial capabilities and others. So my point here is that it is a set of measures. They need to be applied consistently, and it is a continuum. It is not something that you support one SME today by giving access to capital, and that's it. It is something that needs to take place along the life cycle of the business.
I think just one other point, and I mentioned it in my speech, is actually about also education. If you have to work out what Kuwait is best suited to do, what geographically it's best suited to do, what the skill set within the country is best suited to deliver. And you've obviously got a high-skilled people in Kuwait, and therefore it's pointless. Kuwait is working on building sites. It's not pointless, but it's not the skill set that Kuwait should be looking to develop. And through its education system, it should, I think, be looking to develop core activities like health, like distribution perhaps, like tech, where you can use the excellent educated workforce of Kuwait to develop this SME thing. So you mustn't be an answer to all things, but an answer to where your skill set is best equipped.
Thank you very much for your great inputs and advice. أعتقد عندنا الحين كوفي بريك للساعة 12 وعقبها تبتدي العروض المرئية إن شاء الله في بعض التفاصيل عن خدمات الصندوق. Thank you very much. شكرا.